Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. My name is Ganyat Sadiq, and I'm the Advocacy Officer for Justice for All Canada, a human rights advocacy organization challenging genocides. As we approach National Truth and Reconciliation Day on September 30th, we reflect on the ongoing journey towards justice for Indigenous communities across Canada. At Justice for All Canada, we honor their resilience and are steadfast in our solidarity as we continue our advocacy for persecuted Indigenous and Muslim minority communities globally. Today, we stand united to advocate for an urgent and significant cause, the declaration of September 27th as a National Day of Mourning. It is a day for all Canadians to pause, reflect, and honor the lives of Palestinians who have suffered decades of oppression and brutality. This day will serve as a solemn reminder of the violence that has plagued the Palestinian people and act as a call of conscience for all of humanity. September 27, 2008 holds significant meaning as it marks a series of tragic events that have brought immense suffering to the Palestinian community. On September 27, 2008, Israel Operation Cast Lead led to the killing of over 1,400 Palestinians, including 320 children, within a brutal 23-day period. Between 2008 and 2022, over 6,180 Palestinian civilians have been killed in Gaza and the West Bank. And just within the past year, more than 41,000 Palestinians have lost their lives to the relentless bombings, over two-thirds of whom are women and children. The tragedies in Gaza were the targeting of civilians, destruction of healthcare facilities, and the use of illegal weapons continue to this day, are war crimes that demand the Canadian government's attention and action. The Canadian government is responsible for respecting and upholding international law. While we welcome yesterday's joint call for a temporary 21-day ceasefire, Canada must move beyond words to action. This means aligning its policies with the rulings of the International Court of Justice and taking concrete steps at the United Nations to put diplomatic pressure on Israel and end the violence and ensure the provision of humanitarian aid to those in desperate need. We call for September 27th to be declared a National Day of Mourning as a symbol of solidarity with the Palestinian people and a plea for the world to act now. We must stop the ongoing massacres, and we urge all Canadians across all communities to stand with us in compassion and justice. I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Israa Alsaafin, a Palestinian Canadian who advocates with the Gazan Canadian Families League.
Hello, everyone. My name is Israa Alsaafin. I'm a Palestinian Canadian. For almost a year, I have been advocating alongside the Gazan Canadian families, standing together in our struggle. I want to show you my grandfather. This is my grandfather, Amir. He was forced to leave his village, Al-Fallujah, seeking safety for his baby, his wife, and his mother. He left behind his home, his land, his roots, and ended up in a refugee camp in Gaza. He believed it was a temporary. He told my grandmother not to pack much, thinking they would return in just a few days. They never did. They lived their entire life holding onto the hope of going back home. Despite the harsh conditions, he worked hard to raise his children in an environment that was far from being livable. All his children graduated with a higher education, knowing it was their only hope and only chance to survive in this world. My grandfather was a survivor of Nakba in 1948, but I hesitate to call him that. A survivor implies the event is over, but for Palestinians, it never ended. For 76 years, we have been living through the same fate and the same Nakba day after day. My father is now living through the same fate as his dad, despite his effort to shield us from his own childhood trauma and hardships. He lost his everything this past year. He lost his son, my beloved brother, Ahmed, was killed while trying to flee to safety with his baby in Gaza. My father lost his home that he was built with his life saving. He's been displaced again and again, moving from one place to another to protect my siblings and my nephew. As a Canadian, I had hope when Minister Miller announced the special measures back in December 2023. I believed I could bring my family to safety, even if it's temporary. But I was wrong. The process has been incredibly complicated, and as many of us saw, and many of us feel criminalized for just being Palestinian. Here in Canada, many Palestinian Canadians are drowned in debt, having paid money to help their families escape to Egypt. Or they are anxiously waiting for news every day, fearing the worst because their families are still stuck in Gaza. This time, the Nakba has been even more crueler and even more painful. We witnessed the horrific conditions our people endure, denied even the basic right to a safety place. This madness must stop. We need to stand up for human rights. We need to live by the Canadian values, and we need to take actions. Enough is enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Israa. I would now like to introduce Hakima Moktary, a registered social worker, lecturer, activist, and PhD student with over 18 years of experience in the violence against women sector.
Good afternoon. Peace be upon you all. I never thought I would witness in my lifetime the worst humanitarian crisis since the end of the World War II. Yet here I am, like the rest of the rest of the world, watching the atrocities and barbarism inflicted upon Palestinians by the Israeli occupation forces. The International Court of Justice has recently ordered Israel to cease all actions that prevent a real and imminent risk of genocide. According to the British medical journal, The Lancet, up to 186,000 Palestinians have been killed since the Israeli invasion of Gaza in October 2023, most of them women and children. Euromed Human Rights Monitor report that Israel has carried out almost 12 months of systematic destruction, not only of lives, but of healthcare system itself. They have targeted healthcare workers and imposed a deliberate blockade preventing food, essential medicine, and medical supplies from reaching the Gaza Strip. 19 Canadian physicians and healthcare workers, all of whom have volunteered in Gaza since December 2023, have described their involvement as the deadliest place in history for aid workers. In their letter to Canadian government officials last August, they stated that over 500 healthcare workers have been killed, including 63 physicians. Hundreds more have been denied their rights and detained and tortures. These doctors performed life-saving surgeries under unimaginably dire conditions, most often on children under 16 whose homes or tents has been bombed. Let's not forget that the Palestinian people, whether in Gaza or the West Bank, have long faced a brutal apartheid system, enduring a struggle for justice and human rights under the colonizer that acts with total impunity from international community. And now, once again, Israel is normalizing the killing of civilians, including children, by bombing another country, Lebanon, while our own Canadian government remains silent, failing to condemn, even call for a ceasefire. I stand here with you today, not just as a healthcare worker, but as a mother and as a human being. I'm committed to amplify Palestinian voices and the voices of all marginalized communities, ensuring that their stories, their pain, and their resilience are heard. Make no mistake, our Canadian government has the profound responsibility to uphold international law and defend human rights for all. I urge our government to take immediate action by implementing a two-way arms embargo under Canada's Special Economic Measures Act and holding Israel accountable to international humanitarian law. I also call on the government to fix the Gaza temporary visa program, ensuring safe passage for Palestinians seeking refuge in Canada, and that they receive the necessary financial support to rebuild their lives here. Finally, while we speak of the Indigenous people of Palestine, we must also remember the Indigenous people of Canada, the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, who share the painful legacy of being dispossessed of their ancestral lands and subjected to genocide. As we observe September 30th, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, let us honor their ongoing struggle for justice and equality, and let us commit to ensuring that such atrocities never happened again to anyone, anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Hakima. I would now like to introduce Samar Odeh, a political science student and the president of the Palestinian Student Association at the University of Ottawa.
$1,436 lives, 410 children, and over 5,000 injured. In 2008, we witnessed in horror as Israel launched a brutal bombing campaign on Gaza. Without warning, Israeli occupation forces began an unrelenting assault on the Gaza Strip, from land, air, and sea. They deployed white phosphorus for the first time against crowded residential neighborhoods, a chemical weapon that ignites the air, suffocates the lung, and burns through flesh until it reaches the bones. The same chemical weapon that is illegal to use against civilians under the United Nations conventions. Families were woken up in the dead of night by explosions that lit the sky with nowhere to run or hide while their neighbors and loved ones succumbed to their injuries. Families like the Samuni family, whose members were told by Israeli forces that they would be safe if they rounded up in one house. But safety never came. That night, an airstrike obliterated the building, killing 29 of them, including women, children, and the elderly. What ensued wasn't just one tragic event. It was the beginning of a cycle of mass murder and destruction. We saw it in 2008, again in 2012, again in 2014, again in 2021, and now we are seeing it once more. This isn't an occasional crisis. This is an ongoing reality for Palestinians every single day for the past year. A systematic, deliberate strategy of violence, displacement, and death perpetrated by a colonial entity that seeks to erase the Palestinian people from their land. I stand before you today struggling to not be angry. Angry at the injustice, at the violence, and at the world's silence and inaction in the face of Palestinian suffering. Silence and inaction that equals complicity. When the world chooses to look away, it allows the occupation to continue its atrocities unchallenged. Every destroyed home, every bombed school, every mother grieving her child is a testament to this complicity. And let me be clear, this is not a conflict. It is not two equal sides battling it out. This is settler colonialism. It is apartheid, and now it's a genocide. It is a systematic attempt to destroy a people, to erase their history, their culture, their very existence. And as a global community, we cannot afford to sanitize it, to ignore it, and to make excuses for it. So we must call it what it is, a crime against humanity. 1,436 lives in 2008, and in the past year, 10,000 more, tens of thousands more. And for what? For Indigenous people daring to exist on their homeland, for Indigenous people resisting their oppressor. This is why students like us are refusing to stay silent and complicit. The time for justice is long overdue. This means ending the cycle of violence. It means calling on our governments here in Canada and around the world to take real action above empty claims and promises. This means a two-way arms embargo to stop funding and arming the occupation, holding Israel accountable for its war crimes, and supporting Palestinian rights to live with dignity and self-determination. We aren't asking for favors, we are demanding what is owed, for a future where Palestinians don't live under Israeli bombardment and where they can dream of something more than survival. So today, let us do more than just remembering the past. Let us commit to action and accountability. We ask the Canadian government to stand in unwavering solidarity with the people of Palestine. Because justice delayed is justice denied, and we cannot wait any longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Samar. I would now like to introduce our final speaker, Professor Noor Al-Qadri, a professor at the University of Ottawa and the former president of the Canadian Arab Federation.
Today is a day of mourning for those 1,436 people in Palestine that lost their lives in Operation Cast Lead. And we would be remiss if we don't mention the tens of thousands that have died since that operation in 2008. And if we look at the root causes of the problem, it is exactly the same story of all Palestinians that Israa just stated. It started with occupation in 1948, and it started with ethnic cleansing, with uprooting the Palestinian people from their homeland. Those Palestinians that used to smell their land while they are planting their orchards and they're taking care of their olive trees, they are the ones that have been suffering day in, day out with the bombardment and the massacres that are countless by the successive Israeli governments since 1948. What did the world do? Condemnation after condemnation after condemnation, but nothing on the ground. What we see today is just Israel taking more land, uprooting more trees, killing more people, indiscriminately murdering innocent men and women and children and elderly, and the world is watching. When violence becomes the fuel of the survival of Israeli governments led by ultra-right-wing people like Benjamin Netanyahu, when that normalization of violence becomes more and more acceptable as we see it, then they will fuel their survival and thrival on that blood. Just before I came here, I watched Benjamin Netanyahu at the United Nations with his speech. People have started to see this. 80% of the hall left when he started to speak because they knew that his story is based on lies after lies after lies. Yet, still, our government is in shambles. They're not taking a position that is firm. They're not seeing the oppressor from the oppressed. Pierre-Elliott Trudeau, our beloved Right Honorable Prime Minister, would be rolling in his grave if he knows the current Canadian government of the land is not standing up for justice. And we demand on his son, the Right Honorable Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, to take a leadership role in the world in order to save some lives from Palestinians and neighboring countries. While I was watching in the room here and waiting, 4 huge buildings got bombarded in Beirut. I have family there. I don't know what their fate is. They live close by. And justice cannot be just offered on a golden plate, except when pressure happens. We pride ourselves as Canadians when Prime Minister Brian Mulroney led the Western world against apartheid in South Africa. We need this kind of leadership from our Canadian government to lead so that we can stop the genocide that is happening in Gaza, so that we can stop the bombardment that is happening in Lebanon, so that we can stop all those atrocities and save lives, because this is the only way that we can preserve justice for all. While we're preparing for the Day of Truth and Reconciliation outside here in Parliament Hill, we want that truth, we want that reconciliation, we want justice for everybody, the Indigenous people in Canada and the Indigenous people in Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you all for all your attention today. I would like to offer our recommendations, including the fact that Canada must recognize the state of Palestine, as a majority of the globe has done. Canada must also urgently impose sanctions on senior Israeli officials who are responsible for the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And lastly, Canada must take concrete steps to end Israel's 76-year-long apartheid, 57-year-long occupation of Palestinian territories, and 17-year-long blockade on Gaza. Thank you.
We will now take questions on Zoom. If you have a question, please use the raise hand function. As usual, one question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions sur Zoom. Comme à l'habitude, une question et une question de suivi. S'il vous plaît, utilisez la fonction main levée. Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci.